Welcome back to Everyday Fitness. Unfortunately today it's just me. I don't know where Liam's gone. I think he's on holiday or something.
Well, hello. I'm back.
Thought you'd gone to Panama City Beach.
No, we've got to get a YouTube video for the beach.
Well, dedication.
Right.
Today we're going to go through the differences between fat loss and muscle gain in terms of nutrition and training. Just sort of general basics, the differences, or maybe not so different.
Right, so, hope you're all well. We are, so
Very well.
hopefully you are. Hopefully we can be mates. Anyway, so, yeah, like Matt said, fat loss versus muscle gain for specifically training and nutrition. We're going to talk through the nutrition side first and then go into the training. So, the most important thing to obviously just quickly run over is calories as a whole. Now, as soon as you've assumed your maintenance calories, i.e. the calories that you need to consume to maintain your daily weight, you're obviously then going to adjust them necessary to your goal. Okay, so if your goal is fat loss, then you're going to reduce and hop into a deficit. If your goal is muscle gain, then you're going to adjust and increase for your muscle gain phase. Okay, now we've spoken in previous videos sort of how many calories maybe to drop, or like ballparks to estimate with, but essentially it's going to be trial and error for you. All depends on sort of your activity level and stuff like that. So we're not going through that specifically today, so we've already done that in a previous video. So if you do want to know more about that, then go back, mate. But it is important, just as sort of a general consensus, just to assume that you need to be obviously in a deficit for fat loss and in a surplus for muscle gain. That's pretty much covered really, isn't it?
Yep.
Simple as that.
Simple as that for calories. And then we're going to move through each macronutrient and talk about the potential differences between them. So we'll start with protein, as protein is probably the first and foremost most essential one. So with protein, there's going to potentially be slight differences. So again, we've already spoken through a fat loss fundamentals video where we have talked about the range of protein. So if we're aiming for that 0.8 to 1.2 grams per pound of protein, we can stay within that range for both fat loss and muscle gain. However, because you're in a deficit when you're in a fat loss phase, as Liam said, because the goal for fat loss is to hold on to as much lean tissue as you have, you potentially would take the route of taking protein to the higher end, so maybe close to that 1.2. Whereas when we're in a surplus, our goal is to build muscle mass, yes, but that doesn't necessarily mean more protein equals more muscle mass. Because we're in a surplus, we've got more energy available anyway, so potentially protein being that high is just unnecessary, and we can maybe keep towards the lower end, which then saves calories for other macronutrients, which we're going to go on to in a minute.
Yeah, so obviously most people assume that when they want to build muscle that protein's got to be through the roof, which obviously is not the case. But like Matt said, it's sort of just trying to be more efficient with your calories. So there's no need in you having excess protein because it's going to do fuck all essentially. Now that protein, if you reduce it to your 1.2 range, which is the highest it should really be, it means that you can then potentially drop protein slightly and increase carbs, for example, thus giving you a little bit more energy, and then hopefully your lifts will be a little bit better. And it just means that you're not wasting calories for the sake of it, even though like most people, they're like, oh, I've just got to get the calories in. You still got to get them in the right areas. It's just important knowing which ones sort of best to go for, what ranges.
Yeah, so we'll come on to carbs in a minute, but before we do that, we'll quickly talk about fats, because protein and fats are both essential macronutrients. So basically, without them in your diet, you'll feel like shit essentially. You won't be able to function very well. Carbs, initially you might feel like shit, but people can function without them, so they're not necessarily essential. So with fats, the way I like to do it, and I think Liam's pretty similar, is that we tend to like to keep fats to a minimum, a healthy minimum, which then allows, again, as we're going to mention in a minute, higher carb intake for few particular reasons, which Liam has just quickly touched on, but we'll go on to it next. So for a healthy minimum of fats, basically I wouldn't go below, personally, about 0.25 or 0.3 grams per pound of body weight. Now again, individual differences. You can go off how you're feeling, how you're functioning. For females, you might potentially want to go a little bit higher for other reasons. We're not going to delve into a lot now. Sometimes they can benefit from maybe slightly higher fat intake. But yeah, so we like to try and keep a healthy minimum. Just quickly before we go into carbs, though, I will also touch on this. At the end of the day, calories and protein are basically your fundamentals. If your goal is fat loss, well, muscle gain as well, one of the biggest areas you've got to consider is adherence and consistency. So basically, can you stick to your plan? And if you prefer fat foods over carbohydrates, and that's going to cause you to enjoy the diet better and stick to it better, then you might prefer a higher fat intake than a lower carb. But we tend to preference vice versa, so higher carbs and lower fats, because of a few reasons which Liam's going to touch on now.
Yeah, so obviously carbs are probably the thing that most people, particularly with fat loss, they struggle with adherence and consistency and that sustainability factor. So in our sort of experience with clients, and probably, well, certainly for me, for myself, in the past, it's a lot more advised that I would tend to drop fats over carbs if I had to. So if you need to enter a deficit and you're sort of debating what you like better, fats or carbs, you can't just bear in mind the taste of it and what you crave, but you also need to bear in mind sort of the ratio of calories per gram of that. So for example, fats are 9 calories per gram of fat, okay, and carbohydrates are 4 calories per gram. So essentially you can have 2 grams, just over 2.25 grams of carbs for 1 gram of fat. So if you find high volume carbohydrates, for example, and this enables you to stick to your diet more, then you're going to leave that in as opposed to going, do you know what, I'm going to introduce maybe nuts or like maybe some sort of oils or something. Obviously, if you're on a fat loss phase, then the likelihood of you doing that is probably quite minimal, but it's just important to know that for not only the sort of the training perspective, so obviously the energy, which I'll get onto in a second, but it's knowing what you need to get in throughout the day and being able to stick to it is the most important thing. So I would, like Matt said, I'd probably stick to 0.25. Carbs are obviously essential for both sort of phases, just due to pure and simple fact of the energy source that it gives us. Now when obviously we've trained, we're sort of depleted, so glycogen levels will be low. I know it's a bit like sciencey stuff, but basically the carbs that we've stored are basically depleted and wiped out, so we need to basically refuel. So you need fuel to basically train, and you need to refuel after you train. So it's important that we don't sort of take them for granted and just maybe increase fats too high. I know I haven't really been in a surplus for, well, really at all, ever in my life, properly anyway. And I see some people, I don't know if Matt feels like this, probably better to talk to about, but some people can still struggle on, like, even reaching carbohydrates. So if you ask somebody in a fat loss phase, what's your carbs like, are you struggling to hit them, like, not a chance. They'll probably nail them every single day and wish they had more. Whereas as soon as you enter like a lean muscle gaining phase, trying to add some tissue, then I imagine it can get a little bit taxing having to constantly be hitting such high numbers on carbohydrates. I don't know if that's what you feel like.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest issues with people when it comes to putting on muscle mass is eventually when calories get to a certain point, it can be hard to get that food in. And again, like I said, like Liam said, sorry, carbohydrates are there for basically for fuel. So obviously training is important, whether you're trying to drop body fat, whether you're trying to build muscle mass, because we're essentially trying to do the same thing. So training is important. So carbs are basically going to be primary fuel source for that. And then, as Liam said, afterwards as well. So therefore recovery. So sometimes taking calories, sometimes taking carbohydrates high can become an issue, but then, which we'll get onto shortly at the very end of nutrition, comes down to basically picking decent foods.
Yeah.
Which we'll get onto. But yeah, just to recap what Liam said there, in my opinion, prioritise carbs in terms of amounts over fats. Just bear in mind though, if you're on a muscle mass building phase, then when you take calories up, we're probably going to be prioritising carbs. Unless it becomes so hard to eat, then you can take up fats because the more calories, but probably prioritising carbs. When you're in a fat loss phase, or if calories need to drop, it then becomes a weighing up game. It then becomes individual preference. All I would say is there's minimums that I wouldn't drop below. So say for example fats with that 0.25, I wouldn't drop below that, so therefore carbs might have to drop. Protein, I particularly wouldn't really want to drop below a pound per body weight, so then again carbs might have to drop. So even though we potentially want to keep certain things in, we might enjoy them, we're going to have to at the end of the day understand that things might still have to change in ways we perhaps don't like, because at the end of the day health is the priority.
Yeah, mate. Obviously we spoke about it in previous videos, but if calories do need to drop, there's also an option of increasing expenditure as well. So if you really are like shagged and you really don't want to drop your fucking Rice Krispies in the morning, mate, then increasing expenditure could be an option as well. But we've spoken about that previously, it's just highlighting that that is obviously an option. Right, so lastly on calories, we've just got the micronutrients, the boring ones, haven't we? Fruit and veg, mate. Now, whatever your goal is, so fat loss versus muscle gain, whatever it is, even maintenance, you need to be getting your macros in, don't you? Because they contain so many sort of vitamins and minerals that we need just to function. It's a similar sort of principle of fats. If you have no fats in your diet, you're just going to start feeling the effects of that pretty soon. If you have no macros in your diet, the same's going to happen. Now, they differ slightly between fat loss and muscle gain, but the only reason is because of the sheer volume that you can get in is what I'd say. So for fat loss, what I mean is macros tend to be quite low in calories for the most, I'd say for like 89% of the micronutrients tend to be quite low. So for fat loss they're great because you're killing two birds with one stone, mate, aren't you? So you're getting your volume in, you're also getting your micronutrients in, therefore getting your vitamins and minerals as well. So you need to make sure that you're hitting them. Now that should be pretty sustainable and you should be able to adhere to that if you're in a fat loss phase. If not, then your discipline's wank. So I'd have a word with like the parents, something for your upbringing. But for muscle gain, a lot of people tend to follow like a naive opinion that macros become less important. Now when did that happen? Just because you've increased your doesn't mean that micronutrients have just decreased in importance, because do you know what I mean? And you see that a lot, and that is probably through the fact that they're not high calorie enough, which obviously it is a bit shy, but at the same time you've just got to kind of deal with it. And what I'd say is, if you're struggling to get your micronutrients in for that reason whilst in a muscle gaining phase, then you need to, what I'd probably do is I'd probably drop carbs slightly, whatever your sort of macronutrient range is. I'd probably drop your carbohydrates, increase fats, just so you get more calories in through there. Just they'll be basically take like a higher density of calorie, and then micronutrients will be able to come up as well. Just because it'll kind of like balance out, and you'll get like a similar sort of volume of foods for the same calories. You're just lowering maybe a higher volume carbohydrate to a lower volume, higher calorie fat intake, and then you're getting your micronutrients in as well on the side. But it's important not to neglect them at all, whatever your situation. That's all I've got to say, to be honest.
Yeah, don't completely take them out, but I think during the mass gaining phase, you will see a reduction in comparison to fat loss, just because, as Liam said, they are high volume, so when you're taking calories up, you're not going to be able to keep high volume foods in all the time. So you will find a reduction in them, which I think is okay, but we just don't want to eliminate them completely. So yeah, I'll just finish this whole nutrition sort of topic with what I mentioned slightly when I was last speaking. Just bear in mind that when you're in a mass gaining phase, calories are likely going to get high. You might then start struggling, so you've got to pick low volume foods, and foods that are easy to eat for the amount of calories you're getting in. But when you're in a fat loss phase, calories are going to be low, hunger might be pretty high, so you want to pick high volume foods, foods that are going to keep you feeling fuller for longer, for less calories. yeah, that's one of the other bigger differences between them. You just make life easier for yourself. You know, when you cut in, don't pick foods that are high calories but low volume, because you're going to be hungry again within 5 minutes if you don't have the calories to eat. And then when you're mass gaining, don't pick high volume foods with low calories, because you're going to be hating life when you're trying to force food down. And trust me, sometimes it gets to that point where you have to force food down, so pick wisely.
Yeah, that's basically it for the sort of nutrition side. It's just basically common sense when you think about it, innit? Now we've got training as well, so again, there's a lot of naivety that comes to training between fat loss and muscle gain. Now obviously resistance training is essential, imperative and fucking important, mate, when it comes to both. You don't just rely on cardio for fat loss. Okay, we covered that last time, so I'm not going to speak about that again. Just don't do it, mate. Now for fat loss and muscle gain, training is not going to differ that much. Some people seem to assume that when you're in a muscle gaining phase you have to progress every week. That's also bullshit, because it's not going to happen. At the same time, if we flip the coin and talk about fat loss first, and then Matt can talk about muscle gain and his thoughts on it. For fat loss, a lot of people will allow sort of like a psychological like placebo effect come into play when they're training, and they will sort of, they won't mind if weights drop, for example. Okay, so if they got a certain weight last week and it drops by maybe only, even if it's only like 1 or 2 reps, of like, ah, that's fine because I'm in a deficit. You should, like, whilst that might happen and probably will happen at some point, which is fine, you need to go into it with sort of an optimistic outlook. So don't go into it thinking my weight's probably going to drop today. Don't do that. Go into it and think, I need to be in the same mindset as somebody who is in a muscle gaining phase. So to summarise for fat loss, if you're going into it sort of open-minded, then and you don't hit a certain rep range that you wanted to, then you're going to be slightly disappointed, and that's going to sort of carry into next week. And that's sort of what you want. You want something to sort of like keep you in line basically, and not like just accept drops in weights and stuff. That's essentially what I'm getting at.
Yeah. Yeah, so just to quickly note, obviously with resistance training, the goal with resistance training in this instance is to build muscle mass, right? Especially when you're in a mass gain phase. But when you're in a fat loss phase, that goal remains the same thing. When you're in a fat loss phase, the resistance training that is there not to burn calories. The resistance training is there to keep hold of the lean mass that you have, or even potentially, maybe very, very slim chances, actually build some, right? Obviously it does burn calories, but we need to be thinking of it differently. We're doing resistance training to try and keep hold of the muscles we have. So you're going to train in the same way, right? A lot of people think when they go into a fat loss phase, they have to do drop sets, giant sets. They have to hit rep ranges above 15, you know, because that's taking your body into fat burning mode.
Yeah.
Just bollocks.
Unfortunately not a mode.
Just train to almost, like Liam was saying, train to progress, like have that mindset, because you might even get some progressions early on for sure. But train to progress, train to build muscle, be in that mindset. So yes, it's not going to differ much. The only difference you're going to find is when you're in a muscle building phase, you are probably going to progress, obviously, more frequently because you have the energy available for it. But like Liam said again, I would just understand, especially as training age increases, you're not going to progress every week. Yeah. If you get a rep, you get to the point where that's a fucking win.
It's a big dub.
So yes, go with the mindset if you want to progress, because we want to be positive with training, but also understand that it might not happen, and don't get to the point where you're lacking discipline and you're sacrificing form and execution for progressions. Don't do that shit. But yeah, basically very, very, very straightforward. Nothing's really going to change.
Yeah. One last thing that I'll say that's going to change slightly with your training is probably frequency of sessions, maybe. Now, I know that Matt trains 5 days a week at the moment, and we take a rest Wednesday and Sunday.
Yeah.
I train 6 days a week, so I do push-pull legs at the moment. And I feel like, whilst it's not a noticeable difference, and you could still get away with training 5 days a week, or even 4 days, it doesn't actually matter. But I feel like in a muscle gaining phase, you need them 2 rest days are important, man. As opposed to, like for me, for fat loss, just because maybe it's just something that's in my head about it, but I'd like to sort of get there a lot quicker. And whilst if you do 5 days on a muscle gaining phase versus my 6 days, I'd probably say similar, that you're still going to need that rest day for me, but you're going to need them too just as much.
Yeah, I can see where you come from, but again, I think it just comes down to differences in terms of how well can you recover. So if you can recover from doing 5 days a week, then go for it. If you can recover from doing 6, go for it. It's going to be absolutely fine. But I can see where these come from.
Yeah, I think that's just about everything. So we'll wrap up the video there. Like I said, obviously there's a few different factors that you want to take note of that we've rattled through. Just make sure you focus on each of them, because we've not just said that for the good of our own health. Well, technically we have. But at the same time, make sure you take something away from this, and if you've got any questions, obviously, just let us know in the comments. Yeah, hope you enjoyed that one. This has been Everyday Fitness. See you in a bit.